Black boy saves pregnant police officer and never expected the consequences will be so shocking. The old pocket watch weighed heavy in Ethan's jacket as he watched Officer Rebecca direct traffic. Her police uniform stretched slightly over her pregnant belly, and even from this distance, he could see the fatigue in her movements. The intersection buzzed with the usual morning chaos. Street vendors calling out prices, car horns blaring, the shuffling of hurried feet on cracked concrete. That's when he heard it, a shout of panic cutting through the noise. "Watch out!" Ethan's head snapped up to see a bicycle careening out of control, its rider wrestling with the handlebars. The bike's trajectory was clear, it was heading straight for Rebecca. She stood with her back turned, focused on directing a delivery truck, completely unaware of the danger. Time seemed to slow. Bystanders froze, some merely raising phones to record. His father's words echoed in his mind. "Justice isn't just about following laws, son. Sometimes it's about doing what's right when everyone else just watches." Without hesitation, Ethan ran. At 13, Ethan Carter lived a life split between childhood and premature adulthood. His father, Daniel Carter, had been wrongfully imprisoned 11 months ago for a warehouse theft he didn't commit. The evidence seemed irrefutable at the time: security footage, witness testimony, even circumstantial proof that pointed to Daniel's guilt. But Ethan knew better. His father, a former security guard with an unwavering moral compass, had taught him that integrity wasn't negotiable. Since Daniel's imprisonment, Ethan's mother Helen worked double shifts at the local laundromat, leaving early and returning long after dark. Their small two-bedroom apartment in the city's struggling east side felt emptier now, with only the fading echoes of his father's laughter and the weight of unspoken worries filling the spaces between walls. The broken pocket watch Ethan carried had been his father's most prized possession, left behind the morning of his arrest. "Time reveals all truths," Daniel used to say, cleaning the watch's face with careful dedication. Now it served as both a reminder and a promise, a symbol of justice delayed but not denied. Officer Rebecca Martinez stood out among the neighborhood's police force. While most officers viewed the community with suspicion or indifference, she took time to learn names, ask about families, and show genuine care. Her pregnancy hadn't slowed her dedication to the job, though lately, Ethan had noticed her movements growing more careful, her breaks more frequent. Her husband, Police Chief Jack Martinez, carried a reputation for being tough but fair. He'd risen through the ranks quickly, promising to clean up the department, though the whispers of corruption still echoed through the precinct's halls. Lieutenant Mason, who'd led the investigation against Daniel, remained one of the chief's most trusted officers, a fact that kept Ethan awake some nights. The morning of the bicycle incident marked the first disruption to Ethan's careful routine. Usually, his days followed a strict pattern: school, helping with apartment maintenance, grocery shopping with carefully counted coins, and completing homework while his mother worked late. He'd learned to be invisible, to avoid drawing attention from those who might connect him to his criminal father. But watching Officer Rebecca direct traffic that morning, something inside him whispered that maybe it was time to stop hiding. The bicycle clattered to the ground as Ethan helped steady Officer Rebecca, his heart pounding against his ribs. The cyclist lay sprawled on the pavement, dazed but breathing. A crowd had already begun to gather, phones raised to capture the scene. "Thank you," Rebecca breathed, one hand protectively cradling her belly. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool morning air. "If it weren't for you," a voice cut through the murmuring crowd. "What's that kid doing? Causing trouble again?" The accusation came from a middle-aged man in a business suit, his face twisted with familiar prejudice. Several onlookers nodded in agreement, their suspicion of a young black boy in a police incident overriding what they'd just witnessed. Ethan felt the weight of their stares but kept his focus on Rebecca. "Are you okay? Should we call someone?" The concern in his voice was genuine, even as his shoulders tensed under the crowd's scrutiny. "Rebecca!" The commanding voice cut through the morning chaos. Police Chief Jack Martinez strode toward them, his face tight with worry. Two patrol officers flanked him, hands resting near their weapons, a detail that didn't escape Ethan's notice. Jack reached his wife, eyes scanning for injuries before turning to assess the scene. His gaze fell on Ethan, initially sharp with suspicion before Rebecca touched his arm. "Jack, he saved me. The bicycle was coming straight at me, and he—" Her voice trembled slightly. The chief's expression softened, though wariness lingered in his stance. "Thank you, son. What's your name?" Ethan straightened, fighting the urge to step back. "Ethan Carter, sir." He watched recognition flicker across Jack's face. "Carter?" Jack's tone shifted. "Any relation to Daniel Carter?" The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Ethan felt his father's watch pressing against his side, as if urging him forward. "Yes, sir. He's my father." His voice gained strength. "And he's innocent." Silence fell over the intersection. Rebecca's eyes widened slightly, while Jack's expression became unreadable. The moment stretched, heavy with unspoken implications. "You saved my wife today," Jack finally said, his words careful and measured. "Is there anything I can do to thank you?" Ethan's heart hammered. This was his chance, perhaps his only chance. But asking a favor from the police chief, especially about his father's case, could backfire spectacularly. He thought of his mother's exhausted eyes, of the empty chair at their dinner table. "Yes, sir." Ethan met Jack's gaze directly. "I want you to look into my father's case. Please. The security footage, the witness testimony, something's wrong. He couldn't have stolen anything. He wasn't even wearing his watch that day, but the man in the video was." Lieutenant Mason chose that moment to arrive, his patrol car pulling up with a screech of tires. He emerged, taking in the scene with calculated efficiency. "Everything all right here, Chief? I heard Rebecca was involved in an incident." "I'm fine, thanks to Ethan," Rebecca said firmly, still standing close to the boy. Something in her tone made Mason's eyes narrow. "Ethan Carter," Mason said slowly, recognition darkening his features. "Interesting timing, wouldn't you say, Chief? A convicted thief's son just happens to play hero?" Jack held up a hand, silencing Mason's insinuation. The chief studied Ethan for a long moment, noting the boy's unwavering gaze, the quiet dignity in his stance, the way he positioned himself protectively near Rebecca despite his obvious fear of the police. "Mason, take statements from the witnesses. I want a full report on my desk within the hour." Jack's tone left no room for argument. He turned back to Ethan. "Come to my office tomorrow after school. Bring anything you think might help explain why you believe your father is innocent." Mason's face tightened. "Chief, reopening a closed case based on a child's—" "That's all, Lieutenant." Jack cut him off sharply. He placed a gentle hand on Rebecca's back, guiding her toward their car. But before leaving, he looked back at Ethan. "Sometimes justice needs a second chance to get things right." Ethan watched them drive away, his father's broken watch ticking phantom seconds against his ribs. Behind him, he heard Mason speaking quietly into his radio, and he knew that tomorrow would bring either the beginning of hope or the end of it. Either way, there would be no going back to being invisible. The fluorescent lights in the police station buzzed overhead as Ethan sat in Chief Martinez's office the next afternoon. His backpack contained everything he'd gathered about his father's case: newspaper clippings, court documents his mother had copied, and most importantly, the broken watch. "Walk me through what you know," Jack said, his desk cleared except for a legal pad and Daniel Carter's case file. Ethan pulled out the watch first. "Dad always wore this watch. Always. But the morning they arrested him, he left it at home because the clasp was broken." He placed it carefully on the desk. "But in the security footage they used at trial, the person they said was my father is wearing a watch just like this one." Jack picked up the timepiece, examining it closely. "A small detail, but sometimes those matter most." He opened the case file, spreading out photographs. "Tell me more." For the next hour, Ethan outlined inconsistencies he noticed: his father's work schedule that didn't match the theft timing, a witness statement that contradicted known facts, the suspicious speed with which the case had been processed. As Ethan spoke, Jack's expression grew increasingly troubled. He made careful notes, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed his growing suspicion that something was indeed wrong with the case. Neither noticed Lieutenant Mason watching through the office window, his face darkening with each passing minute. The next morning, Rebecca found an envelope on her desk. Inside was a grainy photograph of Ethan walking to school, taken from a distance. No note, just the image, a clear threat. She immediately brought it to Jack. "This isn't just about a wrongful conviction anymore," she said, her hand protectively covering her belly. "They're targeting a child." Jack's jaw tightened as he studied the photo. "They're getting nervous. Which means we're onto something." He assigned 2 trusted officers to quietly watch over Ethan and his mother, then dove deeper into the investigation. The more he looked, the more irregularities he found. The security footage showing Daniel at the warehouse had suspicious gaps. The time stamps didn't align with the access card logs. And the main witness, Paul Stanford, became evasive when questioned again. But the biggest breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sarah Chin, a junior tech analyst in the evidence room, approached Jack after hours. "Chief, I found something strange in the digital archives," she said, her voice low. "Someone accessed the security footage files multiple times before the trial, using Lieutenant Mason's credentials. The metadata shows extensive editing." Jack leaned forward. "Can you prove it?" Sarah nodded. "I've got the access logs and file modifications. But," she hesitated, "Mason's been asking about my family's immigration status lately. He knows my parents' papers aren't all in order." "I'll protect you," Jack promised, understanding the risk she was taking. The next day, Mason cornered Jack in the parking garage. "Drop it, Jack," he growled. "You've got a baby on the way. Focus on your family, not some convicted thief's kid." "That kid saved my wife," Jack replied evenly. "And if Daniel Carter is innocent..." "Innocent?" Mason barked a laugh. "You're willing to tear this department apart over a hunch? Think about your career. About Rebecca's future." The threat hung heavy in the air between them. Meanwhile, Ethan faced his own battles. Word had spread about the investigation, and some kids at school started giving him trouble. "Your dad's a thief," they taunted. "And now you're trying to get good cops in trouble." Even some teachers began treating him differently, their smiles becoming strained, their patience shorter. Only Ms. Rodriguez, his English teacher, remained steadfastly supportive. "Sometimes doing the right thing makes you unpopular," she told him after class one day. "But popularity and truth rarely walk the same path." At home, Helen found threatening notes in their mailbox. Their apartment was broken into, though nothing was taken, just a warning. She wanted to tell Ethan to drop it, to let them live with the injustice. But seeing the determination in her son's eyes, so like his father's, she couldn't bring herself to extinguish that flame. The pressure continued to mount. Jack discovered his office had been bugged. Rebecca's car was vandalized. Sarah Chen's parents received an unexpected visit from immigration officials, though Jack's intervention prevented any action. Paul Stanford, the key witness, finally broke under the strain of his conscience. He came to Jack's office late one evening, visibly shaking. "I lied," he confessed. "Mason made me lie. Said he'd plant drugs in my teenage daughter's car if I didn't cooperate. Daniel Carter wasn't anywhere near that warehouse the night of the theft." Jack recorded the confession, but before he could act on it, Paul disappeared. His apartment was found empty, his daughter safely staying with relatives out of state. The case was becoming more complex, reaching higher into the department than Jack had initially suspected. Mason, it seemed, was just one part of a larger corruption network that had been operating for years. Rebecca, now 7 months pregnant, found Jack in his study late one night, surrounded by case files and evidence photos. "You could stop," she said softly. "No one would blame you." Jack looked up at his wife, then at the photo of Ethan he'd placed on his desk, the boy's brave face reminding him daily of why this fight mattered. "That's exactly why I can't stop," he replied. "Because everyone expects us to give up. Because they think they can frighten us into silence. Because that boy risked himself to save you without hesitation or thought of reward. Rebecca smiled, remembering Ethan's quick action that day. Then we keep going. Together. The next morning, Jack received an anonymous email containing surveillance photos of Ethan, Rebecca, and Helen going about their daily routines. The message was clear: everyone they cared about was being watched. But instead of backing down, Jack called Ethan and Helen into his office. "They're escalating because we're close to the truth," he explained, showing them the photos. "I won't blame you if you want to stop here." Ethan picked up his father's watch from his pocket, its weight familiar and comforting. "Dad always said that justice is hardest when we're most afraid of fighting for it." He looked at his mother, then back at Jack. "We can't stop now." Helen reached for her son's hand. "Whatever happens, we face it as a family." The lines were drawn. The stakes were clear. And somewhere in a prison cell, Daniel Carter waited, unaware that his son's simple act of courage had set in motion events that would shake the very foundation of the police department's corrupt hierarchy. The evidence room's lock had been forced. Jack stood in the doorway, his flashlight beam revealing scattered files and open cabinets. Sarah Chen's careful digital archive was intact. They hadn't found her encrypted backups, but the original security footage and access logs from the warehouse theft were gone. "They're desperate," Rebecca said, examining the damage. "But why now?" Jack's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Found something big. Mason's not the top. Meeting in 20 at Murphy's Diner. Stay here," he told Rebecca. "Call internal affairs about the break-in." But when Jack reached the diner, Sarah wasn't there. Instead, he found a newspaper clipping on her usual table, a 5-year-old article about a massive police pension fund scandal that had been quickly buried. Scrawled in the margin was a single word: "Connected." His phone rang. It was Sarah, her voice trembling. "They took my parents, Chief. Immigration raid. But it wasn't real IC agents." Before Jack could respond, a new voice came on the line. "Quite a mess you're making, Chief Martinez." It was Commissioner Wallace, his superior. "Let's talk." "My office." "Now." At the station, Wallace sat behind his massive desk, his silver hair and tailored suit projecting authority. "You've been causing trouble, Jack. Reopening closed cases. Questioning good officers' integrity. Making serious accusations. With respect, sir, the evidence." "Evidence?" Wallace's laugh was cold. "Like your missing witness? Your compromised crime scene footage? The unsubstantiated claims of a convicted felon's son?" Jack's mind raced, connecting dots. "You knew. About Mason, about the warehouse theft ring. You've known all along. Politics requires compromise, Jack. The department needed that pension money. A few strategic arrests, some redistributed evidence, small prices for the greater good. And Daniel Carter? Was he just another small price?" Wallace shrugged. "Someone had to take the fall. Mason chose well, a former security guard with a record of questioning his superiors. Perfect scapegoat." Neither man had noticed Ethan standing in the doorway, phone recording every word. He'd come to share new information about his father's case but instead stumbled upon the biggest revelation yet. Wallace saw him first. "Well, well. Our young hero." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You should teach him about privacy, Jack. And about what happens to people who stick their noses where they don't belong." Ethan backed away, but 2 officers blocked his exit. Not Mason's men, Wallace's personal security detail. "Delete the recording," Wallace ordered. "And we'll forget this unfortunate incident." Ethan's hand clutched his father's watch. "Like you forgot about my dad? About Sarah's parents? About the truth?" "Brave words from a child," Wallace sneered. "But this is adult business. Complicated matters that." "No," Jack cut in, standing. "He's right. There's nothing complicated about justice. We just pretend there is to excuse our compromises." Wallace's mask slipped. "Last chance, Jack. Think about Rebecca. About your upcoming promotion. About your child's future. During this confrontation, Rebecca had been following her own lead. Paul Stanford's daughter, hidden away with relatives, had reached out. She had copies of files her father had kept as insurance, dates, names, transaction records. Now Rebecca stood in the doorway, flanked by internal affairs agents and FBI investigators. She'd known where Jack was going and made her own plans. I think, she said, one hand resting on her belly, we should all talk about the future. The next hours were a blur of activity. Wallace and his security team were taken into custody. Mason, attempting to flee the city, was arrested at the airport. Sarah's parents were safely recovered from a holding facility, their immigration status expedited by grateful federal agents. But the department's corruption ran deep. More officers were implicated. Old cases needed review. The pension fund scandal exploded in the media. Through it all, Ethan kept thinking about his father, still sitting in prison as the system that put him there crumbled. Then came the hardest moment. Helen had to tell Daniel everything, about Ethan's actions that day with Rebecca, about Jack's investigation, about the danger their son had faced. You should have told me, Daniel said during a prison visit, his voice breaking. I would have. Would have what? Helen asked gently. Told us to stop. Let the truth stay buried. If it meant keeping you both safe? Yes. Ethan gripped the watch in his pocket. That's not what you taught me, Dad. You always said. I know what I said, Daniel interrupted. But I never meant for you to risk everything for me. Not just for you, Ethan replied. For everyone they've hurt. For everyone they might hurt next. A guard approached their table. Time's up. Daniel hugged his son fiercely. Whatever happens next, he whispered, you've already made me prouder than I ever thought possible. Back at the station, Jack faced his own crisis. Fellow officers called him a traitor. Old friends stopped speaking to him. The police union demanded his resignation. Was it worth it? Rebecca asked him late one night. Jack showed her the recording from Ethan's phone, the boy's steady hand and unwavering courage in the face of power. This is what real integrity looks like, he said. How could we teach our child about justice if we weren't willing to fight for it ourselves? The next morning brought news that would change everything. Sarah Chin had recovered deleted segments of the warehouse security footage, segments showing Mason and Wallace themselves orchestrating the theft, planting evidence, and framing Daniel Carter. The moment of truth had arrived. But as they prepared to present their final evidence, a new threat emerged. Wallace had connections outside the department, people who stood to lose everything if the full truth came to light. And they were done playing by the rules. The courthouse steps gleamed in the early morning sun as Jack reviewed their final preparations. Sarah Chin had worked through the night, completing the digital forensics that would prove the security footage tampering. Paul Stanford's daughter had delivered her father's hidden files. Everything was ready for the emergency hearing that would exonerate Daniel Carter. Then Jack's phone buzzed with an anonymous text. Check on your wife. Rebecca wasn't answering her phone. The hospital where she'd gone for her final prenatal checkup had no record of her arrival. Jack's heart pounded as he tried to stay focused, to think like a cop instead of a terrified husband. They're trying to stop us from presenting the evidence, Sarah said, clutching her laptop containing the proof they needed. Classic diversion tactic. Ethan, who had been quietly listening, pulled out his father's watch. We can't let them divide us. That's how they've won all along, by making us choose between justice and the people we love. Jack stared at the boy, seeing the same courage that had driven him to save Rebecca that day at the intersection. You're right. But I have to find her. Then I'll present the evidence, Ethan said firmly. I know this case better than anyone. Let me do this. Absolutely not, Helen protested, grabbing her son's arm. It's too dangerous. Wallace's people are desperate. They've already shown what they're willing to do. A new voice joined the conversation. The boy should do it. They turned to see Ms. Rodriguez, Ethan's English teacher, approaching the courthouse steps. Sometimes the most powerful truth comes from the most unexpected voice. Before anyone could respond, Jack's phone rang. It was Rebecca. "I'm okay," she said immediately. "But you need to hear this." She explained that Wallace's men had tried to intercept her at the hospital, but she'd sensed something wrong and slipped away. In doing so, she'd overheard them planning something bigger. "They're not just coming for the evidence, Jack. They're going to destroy the whole courthouse server room, claim it was a gas leak. All the case files, all the proof of other corrupted cases, everything would be gone." Jack looked at his watch. 30 minutes until the hearing. The judge was already inside, reviewing their preliminary motions. Sarah's laptop contained their only copy of the restored security footage. Paul Stanford's files were locked in the judge's chambers. Everything they'd fought for could disappear in an instant. "We need to split up," Jack decided. "Sarah, get your files to the judge immediately. Helen, take Ethan home where it's safe. I'll find Rebecca and—" "No," Ethan interrupted, his voice stronger than they'd ever heard it. "Running away and hiding, that's what they want. That's what they expect. But Dad always said justice isn't about doing what's expected. It's about doing what's right." He turned to his mother, his eyes pleading. "Mom, all those nights you worked double shifts, all the times you held me when I cried about Dad, you never gave up. You taught me that being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the right thing anyway." Helen touched her son's face, seeing her husband's determination in his eyes. Finally, she nodded. Jack made his decision. "Sarah, get to the judge. I'll find Rebecca and deal with the bomb threat. Helen, you and Ms. Rodriguez handle building evacuation. Get everyone out quietly, no panic. Ethan." He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Think you can stall the hearing until we secure the building?" Ethan gripped his father's watch. "I can tell our story. The whole story. And I won't stop until everyone knows the truth." As they separated, each heading to their assigned tasks, the watch in Ethan's pocket began to tick. After a year of silence, on this morning of all mornings, its gears had finally found their rhythm again. Inside the courthouse, Ethan straightened his shoulders and walked toward the hearing room. Behind him, he could hear the quiet efficiency of his mother and Ms. Rodriguez beginning the evacuation. Somewhere in the building, Sarah raced to preserve their evidence, while Jack worked to save both Rebecca and the courthouse itself. But in front of him sat the judges, lawyers, and officials who needed to hear the truth. With each step, the watch ticked louder, as if his father's spirit walked beside him. It was time to finish what his simple act of courage had started. The hearing room fell silent as Ethan approached the podium, his father's watch steady in his hand. Through the windows, he could see people calmly filing out of the building, his mother and Ms. Rodriguez orchestrating the quiet evacuation. "Your Honor," he began, his voice clear despite his pounding heart. "I'm here to tell you about a watch." Before he could continue, the courtroom doors burst open. Commissioner Wallace strode in, flanked by 2 officers. "This hearing is compromised," he announced. "We have a credible bomb threat. Let him speak." The voice rang from the back of the room. Rebecca stood in the doorway, Jack beside her, both slightly out of breath but triumphant. "The bomb squad has already cleared the building. Your men are in custody." Sarachan slipped in behind them, laptop open. "And I've restored the original security footage. All of it." Wallace's face contorted. "You have no idea what you're doing. The whole system." "The system?" Ethan held up his father's watch. "This watch stopped working the day you arrested my father. The man in your fake footage wore one just like it, but my dad didn't have his that day. A small detail, but sometimes small details reveal the biggest truths." He turned to the judges. "My father taught me that justice isn't just about laws. It's about courage. About standing up when everyone tells you to stay down. About believing in the truth even when lies seem easier." The watch ticked loudly in the quiet room as Sarah played the restored footage. On screen, Wallace and Mason themselves appeared in the warehouse, orchestrating the theft they blamed on Daniel Carter. "You really think you've won?" Wallace snarled. "One case, one corrupt cop? The whole department will burn." No. Jack stepped forward. Just the rot inside it. We found Paul Stamford, Commissioner. He's testifying right now to the FBI about everything, the pension fund, the false arrests, all of it. Rebecca moved to Ethan's side. This boy saved my life without hesitation, without asking for anything in return. When he finally did ask for something, it wasn't for himself, it was for justice. Not just for his father, but for everyone you've hurt. The judges conferred briefly before the chief judge spoke. Given this evidence, we hereby vacate the conviction of Daniel Carter and order his immediate release. Commissioner Wallace, you are remanded into custody pending federal charges. As Wallace was led away, Ethan clutched the watch, its ticking merging with his heartbeat. They'd done it. The truth had finally come to light. Jack placed a hand on his shoulder. Your father would be proud. He already is, came a voice from the doorway. Daniel Carter stood there, released from prison moments before, Helen at his side. Both had tears in their eyes. Ethan ran to his father's arms, the watch pressed between them, its steady ticking a reminder that justice, like time itself, moves ever forward, as long as someone has the courage to take the first step. Has this story of courage and justice touched your heart? Join our community of readers who believe in the power of truth and determination. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications to receive more inspiring tales that remind us how one brave action can change everything. Share your thoughts below on what courage means to you. What would you have done in Ethan's position? When have you stood up for what's right, even when it was difficult? Share your personal stories of courage in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful narratives about ordinary people making extraordinary choices. We all have our own stories of standing up for what's right. Share this story if it resonated with you, and tell us about a time when you or someone you know fought for justice against the odds. Subscribe to join a community that believes in the power of courage and truth.